All right, I'm going to go ahead and start. Welcome. My name is Richard Capone. I'm the CEO and co-founder of sGoLearn. And today we have a webinar that's going to be talking about the strategies for elevating math scores. And so it's going to be a very action-packed webinar. I'm going to go very quickly because there's a lot of content to cover. On a positive level, you will receive a recording of the webinar. You'll receive the slides probably tomorrow in an email. If not tomorrow, then the day after. So don't worry about taking down notes if I'm going too fast. You can always review them later on. So let me go ahead and start. All right, this is our agenda for today. I'm going to do one slide on who is sGoLearn. Then I'm going to talk about some baseline factors of why math performance is low. And then we're going to talk about some case studies about how some districts that we've been working with have overcome this challenge and really turned around their math departments. Then I'm going to do a system demo, a very brief one on sGoLearn, and then we'll do Q&A. All right, so again, this is going to be about 30 minutes, and we're going to go very quickly. So first of all, who's sGoLearn? Well, I founded sGoLearn back in 2000 with Dr. McCollum of UC Berkeley. Our goal at the time was to create an adaptive assessment that could answer why. Why is a student struggling or why are they doing well? And this is really very different in testing because most testing is more accountability based. And what we really wanted something that was teacher driven. And that's what we did. Our first assessment was in reading and it worked on a modem back in 2001. And then today, obviously, we have it, working. We're doing math as well, and we have instruction tied into it. So that's who sGoLearn is. Now, I'm jumping into it. So I'm going to talk about, I think, 5 factors. And this is something that's really good to share with your math departments or your team who's trying to figure out the math problem or how do we really turn our math department around and our math score. So factor 1. Math content is very broad, right? And so everyone needs to sort of understand this. If you look at ever since they've really went to modern math standards, which now cover numbers and operations, measurement, data analysis, geometry, and algebraic thinking, this is just a visualization of how math is taught. Now, you don't need to read the fine print here, but this is K, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and this is all the different content you're teaching, and each of these lines represents a skill or a concept that's being taught. And so when you look at it like this, you say, wow, math is very broad, so it's very hard to teach it and have room for review, and that is sort of the root of the problem and why we see students having low math scores across the United States. So this is the first factor, get everyone to acknowledge this and accept this, and now we start trying to figure out how do we move forward. This is factor 2, upper grade level conceptual understanding, right? Of mastery, what we want to get to requires foundational math skills mastery. So this is a little confusing, right? Math is actually like a foreign language. You really need this base level understanding of numbers and skills, numbers and operations in order to have this other understanding. And this is how actually it's built, right? So you got all these different things. If each of these little area represents what you actually teach in math, you can see that it's built on each other. And that's how it sort of connects together. Now, the one thing I think is really interesting too is that we have to understand that skills mastery, conceptual mastery is actually a combination of skills mastery and conceptual understanding. Now, this is where I've seen some arguments within math departments, where people say, well, ever since, we really have to focus on conceptual teaching. We should not be going back and, going into area of a triangle and going whatever, blah, blah, blah. We need to focus on teaching those 6th graders the concepts. And this sounds great, but the problem is, even the standards say, if students don't have the skills, they're not going to be able to learn and master the concepts, right? So here's how it works. Skills mastery, you're teaching your skills. It's more heavily loaded into lower grades. I'm sort of going from lower grade upward. Conceptual understanding, you're teaching the concepts. Students start understanding the concepts of volume, of exponents, or whatever it may be. Both of these together lead to conceptual mastery. So one of the things you need to do is get everyone to accept this idea within your math department, and this is really important. So then again, you can move forward. All right. Last slide here. If you don't have this built in there, what ends up happening, and this is what we see with a lot of students who are in middle school, they have all these little gaps. When you have all these little gaps, it really draws a ceiling on how high they can get. And I would argue our data shows that by sixth grade, if students have enough gaps, they really sort of hit a ceiling, and they're not learning much from sixth grade on in mathematics. Okay, the third factor I want to talk about is how do you close this gap? This is actually some real data. If you take, for instance, a 30% proficiency at a school level, right? So you say, okay, our school is 30% proficiency in math. Now, it sounds pretty low, but what does that translate to? That means that 50 to 60% of your students are going to be 2 years or more below. 20 to 25-year students are a year below, and half of these students will actually be proficient on the state test, and half will not. So that's where we get the 30% proficiency. And then only about 14 to 17% are actually on grade. Okay. This is what happens in practice. So the downside of this is by the time you hit sixth grade, these students, their rate of learning is so low, it's really about a half a year and a year, that in order to catch up, you really have to hit a 5 to 10x learning rate in order to catch these students up. So I bring this up because I see a lot of piecemeal interventions happening. Like, oh, let's just start adding, breakout time in our core class. Let's have a differentiated core. Let's try to do this. But in math, if you don't have a very aggressive plan, you cannot turn it around, and you cannot boost this. And that's why so many schools, districts, they have low proficiency in middle school or high school, and they're not able to turn it around. So the thing you have to realize is your intervention plan needs to be able to go to 5 to 10x. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. This is a little bit of a complicated graph. All right, the next factor here is this is actually 5 sixth graders. This is very typical. And we took these 5 sixth graders and we mapped their skills across that broad map I showed you in Factor 1, which showed all the different skills. So this is numbers and operations skills, measurement. And you see these are their instructional points, right? Now, this was actually done by our assessment because our assessment's adaptive and it goes K8. So it'll actually go up and down and find students' instructional points. But think about this. If these are 5 typical kids, this is normally what you're teaching. This band right across here is what you're teaching in sixth grade math. Look at their range of skills. So again, the other thing, this factor is it's very hard, almost impossible to create small groups and teach everyone. Now, you could do small groups if you want to go over conceptual teaching, conceptual understanding, but to fill in these gaps is very difficult. And so my argument is that you're really going to need some kind of personalized learning program, right? So that's factor 4. Okay, so just some conclusions here. By upper elementary, if students have not mastered their foundational skills, then they end up becoming lost in middle school. And we see this in terms of the graphs and the data, right? So these things are really important. So you have to focus on these, removing these gaps. And this is really important to understand that this is something that I just showed you through those different slides of what we have to focus on. Okay, so what are some schools doing? And these are examples of schools who actually have turned around their math programs, and I like bringing these up. So first one is Ridley in Pennsylvania. They're an interesting school. So background, they had very low math scores at their middle schools, so they decided to target that. They had an intense pacing guide because the math content is intense and it leaves very little room. So what they decided to do is to basically create a 7th period, right? They didn't feel like they could actually put enough intervention in the regular classes, so they added a 7th period. So all the middle schools decided, okay, we're gonna cut 5 minutes out of each period and we add a 7th period, and that's gonna be personalized learning. And now, not all students necessarily was doing math, but it could be whatever they needed. Now they used our program, which is a personalized learning program, and essentially they turned around their math scores, right? So they were doing intensive intervention in that extra period that gave them the time on task they needed. All right, here's another one, Downey. This is a little bit older case. Same thing, middle school. We're talking about middle school intensive pacing guide. They found it was hard to be able to introduce that into the regular classroom. So what did they do? They actually used extra PE hours. They worked with the teachers and said who has open periods where they could have students come in and basically be put on intervention. They also took students who had extra PE hours and they shifted that over to put them onto math intervention. So the teachers were paid extra hours to use their free period to monitor these students who were using our EDGE program. Now again, I mentioned our EDGE program, but but you could use whatever program you want, The issue is, I think a lot of time at middle school, it's about getting the time on task to fill in those gaps properly. And again, they ended up having a huge increase. I think they went from 20% proficiency to like 30% proficiency in 6th and 8th grade. So it was a pretty significant bump. And no other middle school, there was only one of them that did this, but none of the other ones went up that year, only them. And they only did this for half a year. So that's pretty crazy. All right, here's one, Montebello. Low overall math scores, no strong pull-out program, right? So what did they do? The federal programs department was pretty strong. And so what they ended up doing is looking at those students who were near proficient and actually doing an intense 14-day summer school. They tested the kids in the spring before summer school, and they had that granular diagnostic data, and then they put them on a 14-day intensive program, and they boosted their math scores from a quarter to 0.35 years in 14 days. And this is for 450 students over 2 summers. Each summer they did it. So that's pretty significant. Imagine taking 450 kids, actually making their math score go up a quarter to 0.35 years in 14 days. But again, it was targeted. They knew exactly who they needed to hit, and they put them on the intensive intervention. And again, this was someone they used our Math Edge program. All right, here's another one, Mountain View. This is an interesting one. This is a continuing education high school. Dr. Smith, he's done some webinars with us, and he's a really interesting gentleman. Students were not going to graduate, and so they sent him to continuation high school, and his principal has allowed him to run with it, right? And I like saying that because he had a lot of creative freedom, and he used a combination of solutions. Actually, and ours was one of them. But what he would do is he would assess the students, share the report with the students, say, hey, look, this is where your math scores are. This is what you need to do. So getting them engaged. And then he would do a credit recovery. Okay, here's how you can get credit. Do so many lessons, and then you'll get a credit. And so they were motivated to do it. And what he was doing is right here, they're using either Exact Path, which is another program for the kids near grade, or they're using Edge for the kids who are much farther behind. And what ended up happening is within 2 months, a lot of their students became proficient. And that's because they were motivated, and they had a program like sGoLearn that really focused on giving them exactly what they need. Okay, right there, proficiency in about 2 months. So I basically went over, actually, here's one more example. Sorry about that. And this one, I'm just not naming the name of the school district because we don't have permission. 0% proficiency in middle school math. No one was proficient. Literally no one in this one school. Okay, students, in a sense, they were totally lost in the math curriculum. The teachers and principal recognized it, and the solution was to drop their standard space core curriculum, right? And so they dropped it, and they went they flipped the classroom, and they went everyone working personalized learning, and teacher rotated in small groups. And so this is another that was another interesting way of trying to really turn things around. If your students are non-proficient and by the time they're in 6th grade or middle school, they are lost. So they're going to be lost in the core curriculum. So you have to sort of shift and adjust. And that's what this one school decided to do. All right, so let me talk about sGoLearn and real quickly. So we're basically a diagnostic assessment company with personalized learning with online instruction. So we do a hardcore diagnostic assessment. This creates a learning path for each student. The teacher can also assign lessons. You can use it for a small group, and that's what we do. Now, the reason why we're different is we are based on a diagnostic model of assessment. So we look at math across all these subtests, and we find their instructional points regardless of what grade they are. And this is actually key. I talked about having a 5 to 10x acceleration rate. The only way you could do this is if you have a program that doesn't just identify the gaps, but it identifies the instructional points within each of the gaps. So if I say somebody's low in fractions, I need to know where are they low. They're all the way down at 1st grade, which is going to be concept of fraction. And so I know where to meet them. And so a diagnostic model assessment also translates scores into skills and concepts. So if we look at place value here, place value is actually the stacking of all these skills. Tens and ones, hundreds, thousands, decimal place value. This student, we know definitively in our kind of assessment, which is very granular, this is where they're at, and these are the 2 skills you need to work on next. So again, when you choose a program, if you know you need to have 5 to 10x acceleration rate, you need to pick a program that is going to be able to pull out and find the actual present level, as we call it in special education, or zone of proximal development, or instructional point, right? All right, so let me go ahead and just share with you some data here. So we're actually on track. So I'm looking at some live students. These are real data, but the difference is the names have all been changed or obfuscated, so that way we can share it with you. So here's some scores. Now this is very typical. You may look at a program, NWA and some other programs, and they share with you total scores and some strand scores, right? But this is really still summative. The real key is to have a program that can drill down into more detail. So let's drill down into numbers and operations. So this student is in 7th grade. They have a 4.5 grade level score. Their number and operations score is 4.62. But I can go ahead and drill down, and now I see how are they doing in numbers, place value, ordering, addition of whole numbers, subtraction of whole number. I see all of these, and I can actually sort my class by these skills. And these skills who have a green 5.9, they've all mastered place value. These students right here haven't quite mastered it, and these other students are lower. So this is the kind of granular data you need to be able to drive this detailed intervention you need for students. If you don't have this data, and this is the kind of data you have, I would argue that this is summative, and this is not going to drive personalized learning or accelerated intervention, right? The other thing about, something like our assessment, Adam, is it's a vertically aligned scale. So if I sort my entire class here by this total score, it doesn't matter whether they're in 5th grade, 8th grade, 3rd grade, this score is comparable, right? So I can compare a 7th grader, their absolute levels are at 6.55 in math, where this other student here who is in 6th grade, they have a 4.12, right? So as students take our assessment year over year, their scores are comparable. It is impossible to compare a RIT score like a 725 that someone took in 8th grade versus a 720 that they took in 3rd grade. You know what I mean? Because those are scaled. And so all it tells you is that they're around the same level within their grade level. It doesn't tell you absolutely, what they've done. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me just show you one report here. If I want to go ahead and take a look at a detailed report. So this is a report that's interesting. This shows you, this report's like 15 pages for this student, okay? I don't think you'd print it out. But if we look at fractions, this is how you teach fractions, partitioning object into parts and going all the way down to here. This is where the student's at. They're multiplying and dividing fractions. So Joseph will multiply and divide fractions. That's what he's working on next. And then after that, you'll work on solving word problems using fractions and then multiplying and dividing fractions. So again, this is the kind of data you want to drive this. Let me go ahead, and what I want to do is wrap this up, and we're going to actually I see some questions are popping up. Here's a conclusion I like saying. When you think about how to revamp your math program, don't be a statistic. I've heard so many people talk about, oh, we're really worried because, it's going to take years to overcome and close the gap and the loss from, students, maybe over COVID or whatever, right? Don't be a statistic. This doesn't have to be you. If you change the way you deal with math and how you implement it, you can change it, right? So in a sense, become an outlier by doing something different. If you just stick with core materials, teaching grade level core, having a pacing guide, yes, it's going to take years to change it, if at all. So you have to do something different. So change your model, right? Flip your classroom, do whatever it has to, talk to your teachers, develop your own educational model that takes all those factors into consideration. Math is broad, students have large gaps, you need to have an accelerated rate of learning, right? You take all those factors into consideration and you can change it. Use technology to your advantage. I mean, technology is amazing. The assessment we have is amazing. I don't know if there's any other assessments like there, but I'm sure there's some that maybe you could do, or maybe it's your teachers have their own way of assessing, right? Use technology to your advantage and try to come up with your own model, all right? I also think math is ideal for personalized learning because a lot of math is, someone may understand the conceptual, like I understand volume. I understand, exponents, but then sometimes we just forget these little things like, oh shoot, what's the area of a circle? And I'll give you a quick funny example. I was listening to Joe Bowler at a math conference, and she was talking about conceptual understanding and how you need to teach this, blah, blah, blah. And she used an example of volume, and I forget what it was exactly, but when she was showing that, I realized she was trying to get us, she was talking about estimating, how it's really important to teach people how to estimate And when she was doing that, I was thinking, oh, I forgot the area for a circle, pi r squared, right? But I forgot it for a second. And when I forgot it, I was not paying attention, and I got lost in what she was talking about, right? Because I was trying really hard to think about it. I think this happens to kids, right? We say we need to teach the conceptual understanding, but when kids do not have their skills nailed down, cognitively, they're going to get lost in class. They're like, oh, what's the area for a triangle? What's the area for a circle? What's slope? What's y-intercept? And so that's why I think it's really important. Personalized learning on a computer is great. It fills in those gaps. It reminds kids what they forgot. And then it keeps them on track so that in the classroom, they can learn and get that conceptual mastery of what you have to teach them as a middle school teacher. All right. Okay, so that is the end. Let's go ahead and take some questions. Here's a question, and this is a special education question. Can I use data and reports from LGL to help me build IEPs? Absolutely. I did not show this to you, but that data, that 15-page report, you can actually mine the data by saying, hey, I want my present levels for the kid in numbers and operations. I want to be able to write what are my next goals. So that's a huge part of what we do. Our customers say their teachers are saving 50% of their time writing IEPs and writing goals by using our system. Just because today I'm talking more conceptually and I want you to walk away and use this data to help reform your math departments, I didn't necessarily go into that, but that's a huge part of what we do. And that's why we're case endorsed, right? Because they see the advantage of what our program can do. What type of math reports does sGoLearn provide? We have lots of great math reports. There's a one-page summary report that just shows you where the student's at. There's that 15-page detailed report that shows you lots of information. We have the IEP tool report. Then we also have an amazing report at a site level that you could use to analyze and use for PLCs, right? So in that, you could actually look at your entire district by grade or your entire school by grade level and figure out where there's curricular gaps. That's because our data is so detailed. So there's actually some amazing reports. The question is, are your diagnostics aligned to Common Core or other state standards? Absolutely. So first of all, modern math says you need to cover numbers and operations, geometry, measurement, data analysis, and algebra. That's really all the modern math standards across all of the states say that. We cover all of that, so we overlap. But then we do have specific reports that align to specific states. So if you want to look up by a certain number, like, oh, I want to know how do we meet 7.mg5. So we do have that as well. But the content absolutely covers all of it. All right, here's another one. How does your Math Edge program compare? You mentioned Math Edge. How does your Math Edge program compare to programs like Edmentum or iReady? That's actually interesting you say that. I have this slide I didn't show you guys. Here's what I think is very different. This is the broad, remember, these are all the concepts and the skills of what modern math is. The problem with a lot of those other programs like Edmentum, iReady, and a bunch of them, or even MAP, is they use a score like this to place students in content. How do you use a 745 score to place student within this entire diverse set of skills? You draw a line and you shove the kids into it, right? Or some of them are even worse. They have a single score for math and they place students into a single set of curriculum. That is only good if the student's at grade level. But if the student is not at grade level and they're below, and you saw what I said about how many students are 2 years below, it doesn't work. So our program, we use 44 instructional points. So we take all these little red arrows, we have 44 instructional points, and that's how we place kids into instruction. No one else does that, because I think no one else is crazy enough to make an assessment like we did, right? It really was crazy. It's very difficult when we first made it. So anyway, can we do progress monitoring, informative assessment? Yes. So once you have all this data here, I could choose to do another follow-up assessment within each of these individual strands, right? And then our adaptive assessment will find a new point, and then it'll recalculate your strand scores and your total score. So our system is actually really good for progress monitoring because we're broken up like this. You have your baseline scores, and then you just give quizzes, and that actually generates real-time data and updates just by giving a single quiz. It recalculates your strand score and your total score automatically, so teachers don't have to think about how do I calculate my new total score. Here's another question. How would you train teachers to use your data? I feel like ours are already have too much on their plates. Okay, teachers don't have to understand everything about this. So what we do is we break it up into chunks. If you're trying to get your math teachers to use it, you may really teach them initially to use, let's say, core math teachers to use the Math Edge program. So it's about getting them time on task. But then slowly, if you're having a flexible Friday, then you would teach them, how do I use it to create small groups? And so that's something you could do as well, right? So we let me just show you real quickly here. So what I might do there is I would then say, okay, we're starting to have flexible Fridays. What do we want to work on flexible Fridays? We want to work on place value, hit instructional placement. Now I see these kids are all working on identifying decimal place value. These students are working on 10,000s, 100,000s, millions. These kids have all mastered it so they could work on something else, right? So again, we would break up and chunk the trainings into what you want to roll it out to your district properly, right? Any company should do this, right? If you're working with any vendor, they should be able to help you do that. Okay, I think we got a minute left. How did the Pennsylvania district implement a 7th period? Okay, actually, they don't always call it. I've seen a bunch of districts actually implement an extra period, and they call it different things, right? But the way they do it is they sort of shared those factors I shared with you as like, hey, math is very broad. Our pacing guide is so intense. Hey, math department, what do you think we should do? And they posed it to their teachers, brought them in, showed them the data. Hey, our kids are 2 years behind. What do we do? They actually did 1 year of ADAM testing, our assessment, and they didn't do the instruction, and they shared all that data, and then they actually got their math team and teachers and departments heads to come to the conclusion we need a 7th period. And so I know sometimes it could be hard because sometimes some districts have some just labor union issues, like, hey, you're adding a 7th period, that's more work. But they actually did it very collaboratively. Sorry, tough word. And they got it to work. All right, so that's how they did it. I think that's it. I don't think we have any more questions. So thank you so much. There is a QR code if you want to scan that. If you want to talk to one of our educational consultants throughout our country, so you could do that. Also, my email address is there as well. And I want to just thank you for attending today. We will be sending you the webinar recording, the slides, probably tomorrow or the day after. All right. Thank you so much, and look forward to talking to you soon. Bye-bye.